Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel Warzone. Today we're diving into a dramatic and unfolding story. Belarus explodes. Army turns against Lukashenko, total collapse. Let's get right into it. We begin with the exterior scene. Picture the streets of Minsk and other cities in Belarus, once quiet under the heavy hand of President Alexander Lukashenko, now ablaze with tension. Tanks and armored vehicles rumble across intersections where civilians once marched peacefully. The facade of the state, once seemingly impregnable, is now crumbling in full view. Massive crowds gather around government buildings, pro-military forces shift allegiance, and checkpoints that were solidly loyal to the regime begin to flicker with uncertainty. Buildings near military bases show damage, smoke rises over one. Stable neighborhoods, a clear indication that the force of a nation turning upon itself is no longer mere rhetoric. The world watches in shock as what seemed stable turns volatile. There's a sense of rupture in the very exterior architecture of power. Statues of Lukashenko, official banners still fluttering in the wind, even as soldiers walk past them with expressions of doubt or defiance. The exterior tells the story, a regime under siege, an army no longer monolithic, and a public that senses an opening. Now let's move inside, brief and to the point. Inside military bases, the atmosphere is tense. Officers confer in hushed tones, soldiers glance at their weapons, at each other, wondering whether to follow old orders or embrace a new reality. Inside government offices, aides shuffle papers nervously, advisors lean over maps and monitors. Inside the minds of the people, hope and fear mix. Hope that change may be coming, fear of what happens if change goes wrong. The interior echoes the exterior chaos, but it's quieter, more intimate, and all the more revealing. Turning to performance, how the scenario is playing out and why it matters. The performance here is that of a state apparatus fracturing. The army, once rock solid in its loyalty to Lukashenko, is showing signs of dissent. While I can't verify every detail of specific units turning completely, credible reports indicate that segments of military personnel are refusing to follow orders or talking openly about withdrawing support. This is a seismic shift because the performance of the regime until now rested upon force, loyalty, and control. If the army's performance begins to waver, the entire system risks collapse. Moreover, the public protests, once localized and largely symbolic, now have a new backing. They sense that the shield of the regime is weakening. This gives the opposition greater confidence, the media more leverage, and external actors more influence. The performance is not flawless control anymore, it is unraveling, inconsistent, and increasingly visible. The regime's responses, detentions, propaganda, show trials still happen, but they are overshadowed by images of soldiers refusing to fire, checkpoints being abandoned, and government vehicles turned over. These performances transmit a message: the monolith is cracking. Now let's think about safety features in a metaphorical and practical sense. For ordinary citizens in Belarus, the concept of safety used to hinge on the certainty that the regime would always hold. That feature of predictability kept many fears in check. Now that is eroded, the safety net is frayed. Civilians ask, will the military protect us? Will the police help? Or will those same institutions become unpredictable? The safety features of the state law enforcement, military deterrence, norms of governance are no longer reliable. On the regime side, Lukashenko attempts to reinforce safety features. More patrols, more surveillance, calls for tougher responses to extremist threats. For instance, he has recently instructed armed street patrols to be ready. But those very safety features now risk being double-edged. They might protect the regime's continuity but fail to protect ordinary people, especially if the army fractures further. So the question becomes, what replaces the old safety system when it collapses? The answer is uncertain, which is precisely the danger. The unpredictability of which side certain units will be on, the risk of violence proliferating, the possibility of a power vacuum all pose safety feature breakdowns. On the flip side, for those backing the change, the safety features of the old regime losing credibility is itself a kind of safety feature for them, a chance for reform, accountability, and a new rule of law, though that, too, is far from guaranteed. Now let's highlight the unique selling points of this story, why this moment matters like few others. First, the dramatic shift of allegiance from within the regime's backbone. When an army changes sides or even hesitates, the effect is extraordinary. It signals to the world that the old power might not hold. Second, the broad geographic impact. This is not just one city or one region. The potential for widespread change permeates the whole country, affecting Belarus's internal dynamics and its relationship with neighbors like Russia and Ukraine. Third, timing. In the context of regional instability, Ukraine's war, Western sanctions, economic pressure, the moment becomes a pivot point for Belarus's future trajectory. Will it remain tightly under Lukashenko and Moscow's orbit, or will it tilt toward reform and more independence? Fourth, the human story. We see soldiers, citizens, protesters, families caught between loyalty, fear, and hope. These personal stakes amplify the geopolitics. Fifth, the ripple effect. A successful army, defection, or major shift in Belarus could embolden similar movements elsewhere, or conversely prompt harder crackdowns, making this a bellwether moment for authoritarian regimes. So the unique selling point is, this is not just another protest, it's not just another country in crisis. This could be a systemic transformation, triggered from within the power structure itself. Now let's talk about price. What is being paid and what might be the cost if this escalates? On one level, citizens pay the cost of instability, livelihoods shattered, fear of violence, economic breakdown, possible foreign intervention. Soldiers and officers pay personal risk. Defying orders means prison, exile, or worse. The regime pays the cost of diminished legitimacy, potential sanctions, internal fragmentation. For the region, the price could be significant. If Belarus tips into chaos, neighboring countries may face refugee flows, security risks, or military spillover. For Russia, which relies on Belarus as an ally and buffer state, the price is strategic. Losing Minsk means losing a flank, losing influence, possibly losing a satellite. The cost here is both human and geopolitical. But there's also the price of inaction or lost opportunity. If reform doesn't follow after this moment, the price for Belarus might be years of further stagnation, oppression, or broken trust between society and state. So when we measure price, we measure immediate cost of disruption, the very real risk of violence or repression, and the long-term cost of either change or failed change. If the army turns and the regime falls, the price might be years of rebuilding. If the army remains partially loyal and suppression continues, the price could be a prolonged freeze of society, economy, and rights. Finally, the conclusion. What can we say now about this situation? We are witnessing perhaps one of the most critical inflection points in Belarus's recent history. A regime that appeared stable has cracks. An army that seemed unified may be divided. The people who once feared speaking out may sense opportunity. This doesn't mean change is assured, far from it. Authoritarian systems are resilient. They will fight back, adapt, use violence, censorship, coercion. But the signal now is clear. The status quo is under threat. For viewers and observers, the takeaway is this. Watch the military loyalty, watch the protests' momentum, watch external influence, and watch whether a viable alternative leadership emerges. If the regime falls, the questions then become, what replaces it? Will it lead to democracy, or will it lead to another strongman? Will Belarus pivot westward, remain eastward, or become a battleground? The risk remains high, the cost remains real, but the possibility of a fundamental change in Belarus is now greater than it was just weeks ago. For the channel Warzone, we'll keep watching, analyzing, and reporting. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this video insightful, hit like, subscribe, ring the bell, and share it with others. Stay alert, stay informed, and until next time, I'll see you in the next one.